want to be. All right. So if you're just joining us, we are the Frost Advisory. I'm Mary Barbara Hanna with
Anne Frost.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody.
Excellent to our Thursday, 12:30 Frost Advisory. And we do have a weather warning today. It is going to be hot again. It's August.
And
It's hot, right?
humid. And yeah.
Right. All those things.
So stay
All the nonsense.
hydrated.
That's right. And because it's my birthday, you can have your beverage of choice. I am drinking iced tea at the moment,
No,
but
you're
that will
not.
be that will be changing to my
Yeah.
favorite drink right now called the long drink. Anyway, so today's topic is icebreakers and activities, which is what we had scheduled for last week, logistics for today. But I think next week we can do a combined feature of logistics and whatever else we have for next week. I can't quite remember. The birthday girl doesn't remember. Anyway, so I do want to say thank you again, always, to the people that support us and watch our videos and participate. We really appreciate your support. And we always encourage you to like and follow our page. That helps us get more views out there. We are doing this organically. We haven't invested any money yet in advertising, although I think that's coming a little bit sooner. It's part of our business plan to get there and then eventually move on to LinkedIn and really start attracting the big names out there for the work that we do. But you are our guinea pigs, so please let us know what we're doing well, what we could improve on. We appreciate it. And as always, Kay Jung, she is our amazing behind the scenes person that we appreciate for her insights as to what we are doing well and what we need to do differently. And sometimes we do it and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're like, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And then a week goes by and we're just here ourselves. So talking about icebreakers and activities, as I pull this up, anything you'd like to say, Anne? I like how I knock this table every week. Go ahead.
Well, just as I was putting my material together and reading through what you put together, a lot of this will sort of connect going forward when we do talk about logistics. So I think the point today is just to reinforce the notion that activities are a good thing. And I'm hoping, Mary Barbara, you might be able to speak to that whole, from that adult learning perspective about, they say, talk for an hour or present for an hour and then have a break or an hour and a half, whatever that time frame is. But just in the mind of an adult learner, how important are the activities and the icebreakers to reinforce content? And how many, can you ballpark, for example, if you're having a 3-hour training, can you then sort of ballpark, well, for 3 hours, I'm going to need, based on this content, I'm going to need X number of activities to support that. So that they get, they're able to make those connections, but they're not overloaded as well. So maybe you can.
Absolutely. I think that's a great lead into what we are talking about, because when a couple lessons ago, we talked about scaffolding and what does it mean to introduce new information to your learners. And you, first of all, start off with what they already know on the topic. And that's really even a good icebreaker. So, building on what they know and then introducing the new information and then the hands-on activity that helps move that information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And so how many activities you need, I think one thing to remember, and Anne and I know this, but for our audience, one thing to remember is an activity doesn't have to be a huge event. It can literally be two people turning and talking to each other, answering a question or doing some reflective work. And those kinds of that kind of peer learning is very, very valuable. Usually, especially the group that we've been working with, our medical community, a lot of these people work together, but they don't work in the same office or the same building. They don't really get to see each other all the time. So having this rare opportunity to talk to each other and really share information is great towards team building. It's great towards retention for people, that sense of building community. So the number of activities really just corresponds to how many new things people will be walking away with. And again, several lessons ago, we talked about writing objectives. So if you have three hours, you probably have 2 to 3 objectives. So you need an activity for each objective, I would say.
Mhm.
Some activities can be very long, and Anne's going to speak to that. I mean, she has activities that go 2 hours, but they go 2 hours because she's got 6 hours of time, and those 2 hours for the activity is going to help build or meet the 3 objectives. So if you're newer to this idea of putting together activities, I would say keep it short and sweet, something you can manage as you start to understand how much time it actually takes to explain your activity, to set up the activity, get people started on the journey. So even when I'm saying short and sweet, an activity can still take 20 minutes, because
Mhm.
by the time you explain it, answer people's questions, sort people into groups, get the groups, set off onto their little journey, and then walk around and make sure everybody understands and knows what they're doing. They have time for the activity, they report back,
And
you're
then you
going to need more than
debrief
5 minutes.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're always, and you can always overestimate the time needed. Give yourself more time than you think you might need, because if you end up with extra time, take a break, more small group work, whatever. I mean, there's always other ways to fill in time. So it's better to overestimate the time you need than under,
Absolutely. Yeah,
because
because
then you're rushing.
a lot of these, well, not only these activities, but the content, the presentation itself, you don't, and I've had this happen to me, and it's a bad feeling. I do not like it, where you're rushed for time.
Hmm, hmm.
So it's like, oh, I've got to get all of this in, before the bell rings, before they're
Right.
dismissed. So overestimating the amount of time by 10 or 15 minutes, that gives you a cushion
Yes.
if discussion starts to go, because sometimes, we have talked about this earlier, where you're in the middle of a really good discussion between participants, where I think, Mary Barbara, your reference was look for other experts in the room and have them comment on their experience or what they've learned. And sometimes they're long-winded, but either you can't find the opportune place to sort of interrupt and say, thanks, and we'll put a pin in that for now. So you do have to account for that, and maybe that's something to put in on our list for next week when we talk about logistics, because that, to me, that will include the timing of things. It's just to be prepared for that. So a little extra cushion of time is a good thing. If you don't need it, you don't need it,
Thank
but
you.
if you got it, it's there.
Yeah, I agree. And also, if you ask people for their opinion or to share ideas and they are long-winded, it's very difficult to stop and be like, all right, that's all I really
Yeah,
needed.
that's all the opinion we wanted from you today.
Right. Stop talking now. It's about me now. Okay.
Yeah.
Unless you're using microphones, you just slowly pull the microphone back away from them.
And
All
walk on
right.
to the next person. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So let's move on. We'll talk a little bit about icebreakers. And so there was just a couple things I wanted to mention when it comes to that. Icebreakers, are meant to be fast and fun. Just a quick getting people warmed up, getting them focused on the day. What are we here for? The one thing you'll want to make sure, though, is that your fast and fun icebreaker is geared towards what you're actually doing for the day, that it's part of the theme. So for example, if you're doing team building, you'll want to do an activity that has a theme of team building. You're building communication, do something that involves communication. So the one icebreaker that I'm showing you today, I just call it a group sort, SORT. And that's where, as you can see over here to the left, you've got many different people and they're being sorted by some criteria. So one of the things we've talked a little bit about with you is DISC, the behavioral style of DISC. And so you can ask people, not necessarily sort by DISC style, but ask about characteristics. So for example, you might say, how many people here prefer a data-driven, logical task? Would rather do that. If you like that kind of work, stand to the left. And if you prefer to work with people and big ideas, stand to the right. And so you watch people sort themselves out and then have them turn and look at each other and acknowledge that, like, oh, I never really knew that about you, or that's exactly where I thought you'd end up, And sometimes people are like, I kind of feel in the middle. You could have people go by their energy, how many people are extroverts and love to be around people and get their energy from people, and how many people are more introverted and need some time to re-energize after being with a group. Have them sort that way. And again, acknowledge, oh, of course, we knew you'd be in that group. And then ask them, what is the benefit when you're on a team of having people that are big idea people, lots of energy? What do they bring to the group? How does that strengthen the group? How do the introverts and the detail-oriented people strengthen the group? What are we bringing that strengthens us as a team? And usually people recognize that you need all these types. You need big idea people, you need the logistics people, you need the people that just want to push forward and get things done, you need the support team. So an icebreaker that way, you can just ask questions. Another thing that I've done is just gone around the room and asked people to tell me their first job. What's your name? What do you do? How long have you worked here? And what was the first job you ever had? That can lead to some really fun discussions. I've met people, my husband works for Dairy Queen. And so I've met several people here in Parkersburg that worked at Dairy Queen. And these people are not teenagers. I mean, these are people that are probably 50 and 60 years old. And they're like, oh, my first job was Dairy Queen. And so we get to chuckling about what it was, and how much you got paid. That's always a big one, especially as the minimum wage sort of goes up. But when I was working, minimum wage was $3.25. And I remember I got a raise the next summer and it was $3.50. And finally I was making $3.75, which was a lot of money back then in the early 80s. What about you, Anne? What was your first job?
Lifeguard.
Oh,
Well, if you
of
count
course, babysitting. For women,
Yeah,
for women, we always say that, of course, babysitting.
But the first job where they took out income tax was
That's a good way to think of
lifeguard.
it.
And
Yeah.
there is nothing better than walking around a pool with a whistle.
Not
Telling
that kind of
people
whistle.
no, it's the telling people what to do. So
No, what? You?
yeah, I know. Maybe that's how it all started.
Well, babysitting. First, I'm going to be your babysitter and tell you. Then I'm
Yeah.
going to get a whistle and tell you. You would have done really well with the captain in Sound of Music. He liked to use a whistle to tell people.
Yes, he did.
This means you. So
Yeah.
exactly. So those are some simple icebreakers. I mean, it can just lead to fun, easy, fast conversation. So that's,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
back to your point about Camden Clark and these, how they work in the same for the same organization, but don't get to see each other. Activities like this are perfect for getting people together that don't ordinarily have a conversation on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
And to me, kind of paving the way for getting some insights into what they have to deal with on a daily basis. It's a bridge to that. So I'm actually going to do this sorting activity. We talked about it previously, I just casually, about the tortoise and the hare. That's the way I'm going to frame it.
Yeah.
Are you a tortoise or are you a hare? Do you like to jump in and get it done, move on to the next, or are you more methodical? Do you take your time? You like longer deadlines, so on and so forth. So I will report back how that goes.
Okay, very good.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think that there's, people sometimes, I think, depending on the culture in which you live and work. So there is company culture out there. And you may have the feeling that in your company, fast-paced decision-making, pushing forward is the preferred culture or the preferred movement, but you are not like that necessarily, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. Because again, coming back to the strengths that you're bringing to your team, or the same for people in your company tend to move very slowly and decisions take forever to make. That's not always a good thing. If you're working with a bunch of engineers, that's probably what you're up against. But then the strength you're bringing is that energy to keep things moving. And, and just use the phrase longer deadlines. Sometimes deadlines go too far, right? For some people, they would prefer no deadline because they could always make it better. Can't have it. We got to, we have to produce something. That's what we're about. All right. The next thing I thought I would talk about as an activity is this. I love this activity. I'm not going to give you the link here and now, but I will put it in our comment section after we talk today. And this is a video by a woman named Susan Roberts, and she was at some kind of convention and she video recorded this on YouTube. It's called, let me get the name correct. Susan Robertson is actually her name, and the YouTube video is called Creative Thinking, Don't Kill, Yes But. or yeah, don't kill with yes, but. So meaning, many people come up with an idea and the first thing they hear is yes, but, and then everything just falls apart from there. So I really like this because it is something that can be used with people during a brainstorming session that people hate, I know, but in brainstorming, we either have the yes butters or we have the Pollyannas. And this really helps both groups or both types of people get to a solution that's amenable for everybody. So the way this works is it starts off with good. So you have to start with a problem. And the problem I came up with that I have used previously was a lack of tourism in my city. So where we live in Parkersburg, there's not a high rate of tourism here. There's, I would say, if 100% is we get people every day, I would say 2%. It's just not a place people come visit. That's not to say we don't have fun and interesting things going on here, especially if you're interested in history. Civil War, part of the Civil War was fought here, and there's, the railroad that ran through here, and there was a fort, and they had to protect this area. And West Virginia became part of the Union late in the war, but we did, and this is also through this, not right here, but up around this area, the Mason-Dixon line, which people often think is further south than it is, but it's not. So anyway, so I gave one of our groups the idea of this was the problem, lack of tourism in this city. And then I made people take this solution. The solution was change the name of the city. The other solutions I offered
How
were
did that go, Mary Barbara?
Yeah, it was pretty difficult. Get a professional sports team, change the name of the city, and develop riverfront entertainment. So I made the groups take one of these solutions because they would be easy or difficult in some ways, but changing the name of the city really brings out emotions in people. And isn't that truly what happens when we're brainstorming? We come up with ideas and people, as Anne likes to say, they get all activated. I hate that idea. That's a terrible idea. We would never do that. We've tried that so many times. So I gave them that solution in order to get the emotions running high so that people could really go through the experience of what it's like to brainstorm with people. Now, the idea about this, so we would say, we're going to change the name. What's good about changing the name of a city? So that's where the G is in this scenario. The G is the good ideas about changing the name. It gives us a fresh start. It gives people a fresh viewpoint on who we are and what we're about. So we'll just mention two for now. Those are the good ideas. But what are the problems with this idea of getting a fresh start or renaming? So an example might be the cost of rebranding. It would be huge to think about all the maps, all the books, all the stationery, everything out there. We would have to re-advertise in a much, just the cost of rebranding. It would be insurmountable is my guess. We're not a very wealthy city to begin with. So that would be the problem. So you list what's good about the idea about renaming this city, and then you challenge what's bad, what's the difficulties with doing that thing. Once you come up with those problems, then you actually come up with a solution. And the solution you're coming up with is a response to the yes, but. Let's rename our city. Yes, but it will be expensive. The solution is, how can we approach those? How can we make it affordable? How can we, yeah, exactly. How can we fundraise to do that? How can we get people to invest in the money that would help us rebrand our city? So in this case, we may not, very specifically speaking, we may not have to rename Parkersburg. What we may need to do is invest in advertising Parkersburg. We don't advertise anyway. So that's really the challenge. Bringing tourism to our city isn't about giving us a new name. It's about giving us an updated, fresh look. And what does that look like? It's going to cost money. So the solution is, how can we raise money for this idea? So I will load the video because I highly recommend it for this. And this is a great way to get through problem solving with people, especially when you deal with yes butters. You want to be able to come up with solutions that are amenable for everyone involved and not get shut down by the yes butters or turned off by the Pollyannas who think everything's going to be great. So I will post a link to this. You can also just Google it in YouTube. Her name is Susan Robertson, and it is Creative Thinking, Don't Kill with Yes, But.
And what I like about this, because I have to admit, when I first learned of it in one of your sessions, I was a little, it's like, ooh, I don't quite get this.
Hmm.
However, over time, and because I've witnessed you, use it in several of your trainings, plus I went and watched the video, it's like,
That's right.
I understand it now. And what I really appreciate about it is it's kind of the best of both worlds. You are doing the brainstorming, but there's a little structure to it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that it keeps you from just like going off on a tangent or getting caught up in, but by addressing the yes butters and the Pollyanna, it's inclusive. So the structure, I think, is to me the biggest benefit of this whole exercise.
And
And
I
that's
do, to your
for
point,
people like
Ann,
me, because I found that comforting. I need a little structure. I like to push boundaries, but I need a little structure.
yeah, and that's, thank you for saying that, because when I do this activity with people, I usually make the flip chart for each group. So they're going to break off into groups, might have 4 groups of 4 people, whatever it is. And I actually put the structure in there. So they'll have to fill in the problem. I don't write in what the problem is. They have to write in the solution that I give them. Then I make an area where they have to write what's good about this idea.
Yeah.
Then they pick one of the things that's good about this idea and they say, yes, but, and that's the problem. And then they pick one of those problems and down below that make the solution.
Yeah.
Right. And then, come up with the ideas about how to solve that problem. So, and so that says, you may not, what I think Susan says in her video is you may not start off, you may not end with the exact solution that you came up with, but what you've done is given that solution some time to breathe and grow. And that's really what you want to have happen, because otherwise you get, you're up against a brick wall and the meeting was for nothing. Everybody goes away frustrated and you still have the problem, right?
So do you think, this just occurred to me, because there is a structure to it, there's 3 basic parts to it. So could you take the good piece first and use that as part of your icebreaker? That becomes a whole separate ice-breaking activity. It's going to connect to the content that you're going to talk about. You've done a little bit of the work already. So you're having the conversation, breaking people up in groups, talking about the good. And then later you deliver more content. And then later on you revisit this. And now remember in the opening exercise when we talked about the good, let's revisit that now and move this forward. So
Sorry, I'm jiggling because I'm taking notes. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Ann. And as will happen, this is why it's great to have a network of friends that do something similar, professional friends, because as you are talking about something, the other one, like a light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, that would be an awesome. And I totally agree with you. I think you could use the good, here's our problem, brainstorm in your group, introduce yourself, talk about what you do, and offer one without saying yes, but there's no judging allowed here. We're just collecting ideas and then setting them aside in the parking lot. We're going to move on and we'll come back to these ideas later, so that people do have a time, give it some time to percolate. And even though, and you know what, we have talked a little bit about how the brain works, but whenever the brain feels threatened, this is when we look into our center of safety. And this is why people say yes, but, because they feel pushed, they feel challenged, they're worried, they have some anxiety about the solution. It's just a natural response from your brain to say yes, but. We all do it. And it is the self-reflective part that gets us past that. Yes, but I'm worried about this. Do I really have to be worried about that? Why am I worried about that? What can I do about that? How can I not be worried about that? So it's natural to be a yes butter. It's not maybe as natural to be a Pollyanna, but both sides need to be addressed so that you don't lose the good creative energy that's helping solve the problem. I love that idea, Anne, as far as being an icebreaker.
Great. Thank you.
Kudos to us.
Yes.
I'm just going to throw in one more thing. I also have Bookshelf Shelfies, a different page that I interview people on. And I was talking to an actress, a community theater actress, a few weeks ago for one of my interviews. And she was talking about some theater exercises that they use as part of their theater school or acting school or learning, how to act, whatever. And one of the activities they did was to have a group of people stand up, and they were told to pose the people in such a way that it represented what the story was about. And
Oh,
right away, bing, my little light goes off, and I just was reminded of that. And so I wrote it down. And I think this would also be a very interesting icebreaker to start off. So I was just thinking, like, if you're talking about team building or communication
mhm.
style, and you say to people, okay, not using people that you work with, but just anybody in the room, have 2 or 3 volunteers come up. Now I would like you to pose them to represent, what does communication look like in your team right now? Without words, just have
Ah,
people pose. So it could be like this, it could be like this, it could be like this, it could be like this. I mean, lots of ways that people could pose, but to give a physical representation.
representation. And you know what? In this day and age of COVID, where people might feel, that there's a website,
Oh
trainerswarehouse.com,
yeah, yeah, right.
and I visit that a lot. They have really deep discounted things in their sale on their sale page. So I got some of these for $1 a piece. They're about, what is that, like 5 or 6 inches tall? These little bendable monkeys. So I could give everybody a bendable monkey and do the same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Pose your monkey. What does communication look? And then do a show and tell.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great idea.
I got my money's worth right today. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, as long as you're on a roll over there, Anne, let me move
Yeah.
on to your slide.
Okay, great. Yes. So what I wanted to share with folks today are 2 ideas. One we've talked about previously. The other one, represented by the building blocks, is an activity. Oh, gosh, I stole this from someone 15 years ago and have been using it ever since, to much acclaim. What it is, I break people up in pairs. One is to designate as the supervisor, the other will be the subordinate. Each pair is giving the exact same set of wooden building blocks. They may be different colors, but they'll be the same shapes. So we have a pair, each pair has their own building blocks. As you can see, they're turned back to back. One's the supervisor, the other subordinate. The challenge is only the supervisor can speak. The deal is they are to build a building simultaneously. The supervisor is giving instruction to the subordinate. She's building, he's building. The idea is to get the buildings to be as identical as possible and as tall as possible. And being back to back, they can't really see what the other person is doing. So that is also a barrier. So they've got 6 minutes, they build their buildings, end of time, they turn around, either they're delighted or disappointed. There are prizes. I usually come up with, a little prize for place and show kind of thing. But the idea is, or the content that we're talking about when we do this activity is the importance of giving constructive feedback. So when your supervisor is the only one that it's a one-way process, I'm giving you feedback and then just go and do, and you're not encouraged to ask questions or come back for more information, so on and so forth, then a lot of times the project doesn't meet expectations because you weren't able to get the feedback that you need. So what I really, and if someone is really interested, I actually typed up the instructions for this. I would be happy to share that. I mean, I stole it from somebody, so I can't claim it as my own. But I would be happy to share that. If you're interested, just go to Frost Advisory on Facebook page and let me know. I'll be happy to send it to you. But what the beautiful thing that I like about this exercise is when they first see those blocks, it's like kids in a candy store. Immediately the energy goes up, oh, so we're going to play with blocks, yay. And then they dump them out and they make all kinds of noise, and they have a good time with the actual activity itself. And then at the end, and I think that's maybe an important point to emphasize, no matter what icebreaker, well, maybe not so much icebreakers, but certainly the activities that you incorporate into your presentation, you have to make sure you debrief them well at the end.
Yes.
And during that debriefing is when you're making connections to the content, the purpose of the activity. A minute ago, Mary Barbara, you were just, when you were talking about icebreakers, I can remember doing icebreakers in various trainings, and they were fun, they were silly, they got the energy up, but and this could be part of my disc style for sure, but it's like, what the hell does this have to do with what we're going to talk about today?
Right.
You know, so now I'm sitting back just waiting. It's like, make a connection to what we just
Yes.
did. And so I'm spending more time in my head trying to and I'm missing. So it becomes a barrier to me taking in the information. So I really can't say that enough, is make a connection, large or small, you know, whatever that is, but just make a connection. And that to me happens during the debriefing conversation that you have. And
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I really appreciate about this activity is everybody remembers the building blocks.
Mm-hmm.
When we do these leadership series of trainings, usually communications up in the beginning and even down all the way through, by the time we get to the end, people still remember the building blocks activity because it's simple to do. It takes a little work on your part as the facilitator to ensure that everybody understands what the expectations are, what the process will be, and then of course going through the debriefing. But it is time well spent because they remember it. They are able to make those connections between, we're building the same thing. We're supposed to be doing the same project, but there's been no constructive feedback along the way. So things turn out markedly different than you expect. So what were you going to say, Mary Barbara?
You mentioned the word process, and many times I have to remind people that it's the process that's important. So for one example, when we're doing GPS, that good problem solution, we're learning the process. Mm-hmm. What we're doing, this activity don't get caught up in that, don't freak out about renaming the city or, moving Walmart out or whatever we're talking about. I really want people to remember this is just about learning the process. And mm-hmm. So to your point, I mean, building blocks is fun and it's great, but if you're in your mind, you're like, this is kiddie stuff, focus on the
right.
process.
Right.
That's
right.
what we're really trying to do here. I cannot emulate your office, but I can make you go through a process that you use in your office. And that's what mm-hmm. we want people to focus on.
And I think that's the beauty of activities is you're doing something hands-on, mm-hmm. which reinforces content. You're doing something that's enjoyable. I mean, there's how much research has been done about if you enjoy or have fun at work.
That's right.
You perform better. So you're trying to incorporate a little bit of fun, getting folks to move around the room a little bit or just move in a different position, maybe talk to someone they haven't spoken with at work in a while or forever. So there's a lot of sort of underlying benefits besides just making a direct connection between the activity and the point you're trying to emphasize in your content. So, that's what I get out of activities such as the building, any activity really, are those underlying benefits.
Yeah, I agree.
The thing you have to remember if you decide to do the building blocks activity is to have enough building blocks for everybody in the room, which is a challenge. I mean, I've stolen blocks from my grandkids, poor things, but I have enough sets that I could do 11 pairs, so 22 people. Think about it. That's a lot of blocks to haul around. So that's a kind of downside with this is you have to figure out how to keep them contained and how to transport them, because sometimes that is cumbersome. The worst was when I was doing it for a local company, and the training room was on the second floor and they had no elevator.
Oh, no.
So I'm carrying this, but you know, you do what you do as a trainer.
I think for that icebreaker, and you could have said, okay, I'm going to break you into groups, and the supervisors are going to stay up here, and you're going to send people down the stairs to collect blocks.
That was
And
perfect. Where were you? Where were you? That's beautiful. I love it. The second thing I want to share with folks is something we've talked a little bit about already, is this plus delta. And I think when we talked about it earlier, it was in the context of getting constructive feedback from folks. One of the things I like about this plus delta is that the functional utility of it. You can use it as an icebreaker, a dedicated activity. It's a way to gather feedback for you to use at a later date. I've distributed this out ahead of the training to participants with a sort of a, you know, when you think about your leadership in your department, particularly as it relates to your communication skills, ... What worked well? What could you do differently? So I would send it out ahead of the training. I'd collect it. I compile it in one document. So if I had 15 participants, I'd have 15 of these I'm compiling into one document. And then that becomes the ice-breaking activity on the first session. You know, get with a partner and talk about, you know, what's on this list, you know, where do you see some common themes on both sides, the plus or the delta. If you had to choose your top three, what would they be? Where would you put, you know, so there's lots of ways to use this in the beginning, during, or even after. You could use it as an evaluation tool.
Yes,
For your
sure.
You know, how did today's discussion go? What worked well? What could I do differently to be more effective as a trainer facilitator? And you can make up your own form, like I'm trying to represent here. You could just have them pull out a sheet of paper, say, draw a line down the center of your page and put a plus at the top and a triangle on the other, and then give them something to respond to, collect that, and use it as part of the discussion, or as I mentioned, an evaluation tool. So,
one thing I would just like to mention very quickly is I didn't know for a long time that the triangle meant delta, which means change. So for anybody that is not familiar with using a triangle, whether it's in proofreading or what have you, you see that triangle, it stands for delta. And apparently, what does the word delta mean? Does it literally mean change?
I'm just going to say yes,
Edit?
because it's your birthday.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's your birthday.
Yeah, it's the difference.
Difference.
My daughter and husband my daughter's youngest son, and my husband are engineers, and they'll talk about blah, 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 statistic, number, quadratic formula, and the delta represents what's the difference.
Okay.
With that mathematical engineering, whatever they're working on.
I do know the quadratic equation that a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
There you go. And I haven't used it since 1996.
I can't tell you anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason I do know is because my previous and sometimes ongoing work as a GED teacher, and we get into a little bit of algebra and so being able to. I can't do it. I can't say I understand it. I just have to be able to sort of explain it to other people. Anyway, I digress. All right.
To kind of wind up today's conversation about icebreakers and activities, I hope we gave you some good ideas, or channeled your energies in thinking about, you know, what if you've got your objectives and you've got your content organized. Remember, I talked a few weeks ago, I talked about the idea of chunking your content, where you're delivering, and then you're taking some type of a break. That break could be a break, you know, get something to eat, refresh with whatever, or the break could be, now let's do an activity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good way to, you know, to insert these types of activities into your content in order to reinforce, you know, what you've been talking about. I want to also mention, be prepared, as the slide says, because things don't always go as you plan. And what this represents was an activity that failed miserably with one particular group. And Mary Barbara, if you'll flip the slide for me, please. I was asking, there's some material that I absolutely love. It's called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it's by the book is written by Patrick Lencioni. And they have since sort of altered that because that does sound kind of negative. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is now 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. So I was using this as an activity. We were talking about those 5 behaviors. And I enjoy, over time, I have come to enjoy getting folks to think about where are they now with this particular bit of, practice or principle. So Mary Barbara referred to it earlier about where are you with your communication? This is asking that question, where are you now in terms of those 5 behaviors of a cohesive team is essentially the same thing. So I made this, as you can see, this chart and gave everybody 5 green dots. And they were to place the dot where they thought their department was in terms of these 5 behaviors. Out of, how many do we have? Like 4,
2, 4, 6. Well, he has 6 trainings.
7. Yes, 6 sessions.
With about 15 people in each.
Yeah, so this one particular group just, I don't know what you're talking, my department, well, we don't, they had all these barriers, or I mean, just barrier after barrier of why they couldn't do this activity, to the point where there was anarchy in the classroom.
Dun, dun, dun.
And I'm like, but it worked the last time I did it. And it worked so well. Why is it not working today or, during this session? So I just thought, it doesn't matter. What the heck? So I just rolled up this slide and said, let's just keep those behaviors in mind and let's just move forward, because this is creating too big of a distraction and I don't want to get off track. So sometimes that's just, you just have to fold, throw your cards on the table and just fold. And that's okay. If that had happened to me 20 years ago, I probably would have walked out of the room. It's like, they don't want to put their green dots on my board. What's wrong with them? So we just have to recognize that people may not come, no matter how off or hard you try to deliver the perfect set of instructions or say this is going to connect to, and you think you're clear, sometimes it's just not going to work. And that's okay. So just fold, laugh about it as best you can, and then just go on to the next. Again, it goes back to my accordion instructor. My accordion teacher said, if you don't draw attention to it, they won't know that you did it. So just say, this isn't working and that's fine. And let's just move on and try to talk about the same content, in a different way.
Yeah.
So maintain a good sense of humor, being agile, being able to do that. Those will be 2 of your best friends when things like this happen. Another thing that I think we're going to have to be prepared for, to do something a little different and come out of our comfort zones maybe as trainers, is this whole thing called COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Because I do enjoy my activities. I love group work. I love having turn to your neighbor and have this conversation. So we're not really able to do that for the time being. Physically getting together is, whether, even physically getting together, wearing masks it's going to be a barrier that we're going to have to figure out a way to overcome and still make it an engaging session. Doing Zoom, I think I'm going to have to learn, old dog's going to have to learn some more new tricks with Zoom about how to break people out into their rooms so that they can. My son was trying to tell me about that yesterday, and I was doing a lot of nodding, like your friend Vera. Yeah.
Nodding and smiling.
Yeah, and I didn't. So that's really going to be a challenge for trainers at this point in time to, activities, icebreakers, they work so well. They do a good job of driving those points home, but how are we going to be able to do that given how we're having to change how we deliver material? The other thing we need to be prepared for, there's an exercise that I do. It's the one, a 2-hour one that Mary Barbara referred to earlier. It's called Gimme Shelter, where you've got X number of groups of people. They're giving a bag full of supplies, and they're supposed to make a shelter out of these supplies. And the idea is to reinforce things like teamwork, communication, feedback. Oh, and yeah, they can't talk to each other the whole time they're doing it. So it's a fun thing, and it's certainly challenging. What I did not consider, and fortunately I learned this the first time I did it, is some people can't get down on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can get down, they just can't get back up. You know what I mean? So the whole logistics of that presented it.
Accessibility.
Yeah, I have to rethink how I have the room arranged in order to make sure there's table space. If you can't build it on the floor, you can build it on the table.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's things that you have to consider with the activity, because you don't want to make anybody feel excluded. The idea is remember, it's those underlying benefits of doing activities is you're bringing people together that may not ordinarily get that opportunity. So you don't want to sort of mess that up by not considering those types of logistics. And just the last thing, just if I haven't said it enough already, is just to make sure when you're debriefing these, well, first of all, make sure you debrief them.
Right.
And when you do, connect the dots with the activity and the content you're trying to share with folks.
Absolutely.
So that pretty
right.
much takes care of our brief conversation about activities and icebreakers today. I think this will flow nicely for next week when we talk about the logistics of not only the training, but don't forget about, if you're going to have activities, you need to make sure, you know, this is available to you. Do you have enough room? There was one, it was out at Camor's where I was going to do the building blocks activity, and the room would not work. It was set up in a classroom, a certain classroom style, that the tables were real close together. They couldn't turn. I said, okay, two things have to happen. Either we find a different room, or I just lose the building blocks activity. I come up with something else. So, and that was okay. I was just glad that I scouted it out before.
Yes.
Which is another maybe good tip to remember. It's a good reason to go out to the site and look at it as you're designing and developing your content, which will include activities. So.
And next week when we talk about logistics, that'll certainly come into play. You know, having that, making a point of having access to the area, because people will say, oh yeah, we have this, we have that. You don't really know what they mean. You might ask, do you have microphones? They're like, oh yeah, we got microphones, but they don't work. They don't have the batteries. They haven't used them in years. There isn't really a pull down screen. Oh, I forgot the projector went home with so-and-so and they never brought it back. I mean, you know, people mean well when they say that our site is ready and we've got a good training room, but you as the trainer, it's your responsibility really to make sure that it is exactly what you need and has everything set up the way you need it set up.
Because you just don't want an oh no moment.
That's for sure. At 8 o'clock in the morning. Oh, what? You don't have electricity today. Oh, okay. All right, Ann. Anything else?
That pretty much does it for me.
Excellent.
I hope some light bulbs went off for folks, and you know, maybe something we said has triggered an idea for you in terms of icebreakers or activities. If we did, then please share them on our Facebook page.
That's right. Say hello.
That would be something maybe one of those underlying benefits. The more we could get people to share their ideas on Facebook, you know, through the Frost Advisory, because that's what we do. We learn from each other. Mary Barbara said it earlier, to have another trainer to bounce or trainers to bounce ideas off of, or something triggers, aha, I could do that, or I just tweak it this way and it's going to be a perfect fit for what I'm doing. That's what we're here for.
And I agree, because you can all, and if you have problems, if you have a challenge, like, oh, I tried this icebreaker and it failed horribly, or here's an activity I'd like to do, but I'm not sure how to modify it. Both ways, if you've got
Yeah.
advice, give it. And if you've got questions, ask them, and, network with us and other people that are following on the page, and we can work together. I think that's
I love
a
it.
good reminder, my love. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. I'm going to go off and celebrate my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I don't actually know what I'm going to go do, but it involves birthday cake. So that's it.
Well, that's all you need.
That's all
maybe
I
a few
need.
sparklers
Maybe a
and
few.
maybe some of that special tea.
Gotcha.
There you go. All
Thanks,
right.
Mama. All right,
All right,
everyone.
thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Mhm.